Freddie Francis has won 2 Oscars for his cinematography. He became famous for his early black and white work, and it was this look that director David Lynch asked him to recreate in 1980 for The Elephant Man.
Freddie was one of my strongest allies during the making of The Elephant Man, and he really felt so strongly his job is to get the director what he wants.
I entered the film industry just after I left school. I was about 15 or so, and I was very interested in movies, just as a sort of fan, really, and madly in love with Joan Blondell.
Freddie began his career in the mid-1930s as a clapper boy at British International Pictures at Elstree. He moved quickly through the ranks, working at virtually every British studio. When war broke out, Freddie was able to polish his skills working in the Army Kinematograph Service. Two weeks after being demobbed, Freddie was put under contract at Alexander Korda's Shepperton Studios. He became a highly sought-after camera operator, working with directors such as Michael Powell and John Huston. Freddie never looked back. These are just some of the highlights from his career. Sons and Lovers brought Freddie Francis his first Oscar for cinematography.
That year, various people, wonderful cameramen were nominated, and I thought, well, I'm lucky to be nominated. And in the morning on television and in the newspapers, nobody said who had got it. Ozzie Morris's brother, Reg, who lives in Canada, rang me to congratulate. So it wasn't until then I knew I'd got the first one. So that was wonderful.
The Innocents, starring Deborah Kerr and directed by Jack Clayton, was one of the first CinemaScope pictures to be made in England. A sensitivity to actors and their needs has always played a big part in Freddie's work.
The strangest thing was I could look through the camera, and whenever Meryl Streep was in the shot, I could always read. There was one incident where we were doing a shot which took us all the morning, and I kept saying to Carol, Carol, Meryl's upset about something, but I think you should have a word with her. Carol said, no, she does, that's all right, she's just not worried at all, I've been speaking to her. And I said, well, I think she's worried, and I kept saying this to Carol. Anyway, we shot the sequence, and we came back from lunch, and Carol said, we're going to have to redo that shot. Meryl's not happy with it.
Martin Scorsese asked Freddie to his remake of the classic thriller Cape Fear.
He said to me, did you see the original Cape Fear? I said, yes, I did, Marty. He said, what did you think? I said, Marty, I can't remember it that well, except that I liked the photography. Oh, good. And we sat down, and then because Marty is a great film historian, he knew that I was being a very dear friend with Mickey Powell. He just spoke to me for the next 2 or 3 hours about Mickey Powell, and that was the only discussion we ever had about the photography on Cape Fear.
The Civil War epic Glory, directed Wick, was to bring mixed emotions for Freddie.
We started shooting, and halfway through I realized that Ed wasn't happy with the way I was doing it. Under normal circumstances, I would have said, well, forget it, Ed, I'll walk off. But I'd turned down all sorts of things, so I was going to carry through. And he has since said that he didn't like working with me because I was old-fashioned. But we got through it, and you may remember at the end of it I won an Academy Award, and Ed didn't, so one of us must have been right. I thought it was going to be a good movie because I thought David had something, you know.
The Elephant Man was Freddie's introduction to director David Lynch, a partnership that has resulted in 3 films. The most recent, The Straight Story, was shot last year. He was 82.
I flew over to England with Jonathan Sanger, who was the producer of the film, And one of our first jobs was to find a cinematographer, and we wanted somebody that had shot black and white before. Freddie's name came up, and I personally loved Sons and Lovers.
Our personalities clicked, we got on very well together. And eventually, they had to choose who they wanted for the movie, and they got down to two names.
Freddie hadn't shot a film for a bunch of years. I don't know how many years he'd been, directing. But he said he wanted to get back into cinematography.
Everybody said to David and to Jonathan, well, you can't have Freddie, he hasn't photographed a film for 10 years, to which David says, well, it's rather like riding a bicycle. Once you've done it, you can always do it.
Jonathan and I could hide, so we decided we'd flip a coin. And we gave each of the two heads or tails and flipped the coin. And Freddie lost the toss. So we both looked at each other and said, no, 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 it's got to be Freddie.
I never devise anything, really. It's just that whatever scene is set before me, I photograph it with in mind how I and the director have decided to tell this story, and I give it that mood. David had this idea and suddenly produced these 5 or 6 elephants. We had no set or anything, so I said, well, just let them loose in the studio. There are no sets in the studio. And I just sort of backlit them from the rail so that we wouldn't see any of the studio. And I thought the thing worked out fantastically.
Sometimes the story just cries out for black and white, and white removes you one step from reality, and you can drift into another world so beautifully.
Whenever John was in his makeup, our relationship was completely different to our relationship when he was not up. And I find these things the same as my relationship with Merrill and these other people. I find these sort of personal things almost as interesting to me as making the movie.
Mr. Merrick, I'd like you to meet my wife, Anne. Anne, this is John Merrick.
Well, Freddie, he'd rather feel his way through something. He doesn't like any kind of, person coming up and saying, talking about some modern light or some sort of weird, thing that's just come on the scene. Sensitivity is crucial. There's one scene where Tony Hopkins, Frederick Treves, is looking in a window in a big close-up, and shooting through the glass, and the feel of that look was so beautiful. But then he turns, and instead of rack focusing as he walks away, it just went we just let it go softer and softer and softer. That shot's very beautiful.
I do know that an awful lot of the unit did not understand David or his methods, and I know at the end of the movie, or during the editing period, a lot of people were completely against the picture.
Terry Clegg, the production manager, came in, and as he was leaving, I said, oh, by the way, Terry, how'd you like the film? And he turned to me and he said, well, quite frankly, David, I was very disappointed. And I couldn't believe it. And then they all wrote me a letter telling me all the things they thought was wrong with it.
So I'd seen it. I said, David, forget it, it's wonderful. And gave David a few drinks and managed to persuade him not to touch the movie.
And I went back to Los Angeles. And about 2 months later, I get a call, I think it was in the middle of the night, from Terry Clegg. And the film had just opened in London, and he had seen it, and he said it was one of the most beautiful films he'd ever seen in his life, and he was sorry, about that incident earlier. So it was a happy ending.